Well, thanks for tuning in for a quick video reviewing the in brief sections from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraphs 228 to 231. These are very deep topics, but I want to touch on them lightly just so that we're sure that we get an overview of the big picture. There's a lot more going on in the profound mystery of God than we can give service in any short video, but that won't stop us from beginning our meditation and pushing farther ahead as we draw closer to God. The first paragraph of this in brief section looks back to perhaps the most famous prayer in all of Scripture. It's quoted in the formulation from Deuteronomy 6, which is repeated in Mark. And in fact, the formulation occurs in multiple places in Scripture in the Old Testament and the New Testament. It begins, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." And then we have a quote from Tertullian, which ends, "If God is not one, he is not God." Now, we need to think about the oneness of this God, which really is the uniqueness of this God, the only God. And in order to do that, I'd like to take a closer look at the fuller verse as it's recorded in Deuteronomy. So this is my New American Bible translation with the Shema, the Hebrew word for hear. "Shema, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord your God with your whole heart and with your whole being and with your whole strength. Take to heart these words which I commend to you today. Keep repeating them to your children. Recite them when you are at home and when you are away, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them on your arm as a sign, and let them be as a pendant on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates." This idea, this scripture, this prophecy in a way, the beginning of the very first commandment from the 10 great commandments that Moses gets at Sinai, is fundamental for the people of God. The Lord our God is the Lord alone. Therefore you shall love the Lord. There's a lot to say about how we might think of the oneness of God, the only God. For me, it's helpful to kind of think of a map and ask a question. If this is God, and I want to make something else very important, then I have to ask myself, is this other thing the same thing as God? Is it included in the mystery of God? Or is it different? And if it is different, then I know it is not divine. So we often think about money, right? Is money God? No, we're not going to draw that in the boundaries. Are cars God? Are houses God? No. And so we have to live a life which says those things are not God. That's pretty straightforward, and we all know this from thinking through a review of conscience. But we might come up with something else, like, is strength God, or is God strong? Or is power God, or is God powerful? There would be many other ways that we might think of God. Is he all-knowing? Is he all-truth? Is he all-beautiful? Many of these concepts actually fit much better within the idea of God, right? Within how God has even revealed himself to us than, of course, money or houses or any other thing that we might think of in terms of our status. But notice what the commandment says. Notice what the Shema and the repeated bit here in our Defining God in the Catechism, paragraph 228 says. It says, there is only one God. You can't envision some other God, Zeus or Allah or anyone else that might be that God. And because there is this one God, because this God is the only God, because this God is unique, the prayer continues, therefore you shall love. Now, we have to ask ourselves, why is love the appropriate response to this God, the only God that Scripture knows? Well, of course, this is going to be revealed to us in the New Testament. We'll see it manifest in our understanding of the Catechism over and over again. Why should I love in response to God? Precisely because what is unique about God, as John tells us, is that God is love. Right, so we return to this thought of what's going on in the Catechism when we're first shaping our belief. What does it mean to believe? Well, it means that we hear the Lord our God presenting himself, revealing himself as the one God, the unique God of love. No other God is this kind of God. And think about this. You can go read all of the ancient Near Eastern religions. You can go read all of the modern things that we call religion. Any attempt that humans have to understand God, to use our mind, our reason, our philosophy to articulate God. And we will do things like, well, we'll understand money is not God. Status is not God. And we'll get close and close and close. But the one thing I think that humans will never achieve on our own, apart from divine revelation, is recognizing the fullness of this commandment from Deuteronomy, from Mark, that occurs all throughout Scripture, and in fact is revealed in the Incarnation. God is love. That's what's unique. That's what's different about the Christian God. Now, we push on with this and we think about paragraph 22.5, like faith in God leads us to turn to him alone as our first origin and our ultimate goal. Now think about this, because what the Catechism is saying is, if you get the picture of God wrong, if you impose your own picture of God instead of, what God has revealed himself to be, then you're going to do the same thing. You're going to put, that God as your origin and that God as your ultimate goal. If money is your ultimate goal, that's what you're going to pursue. If status is your ultimate goal, that's what you're going to pursue. If power, submission, authority is your ultimate goal, that's whence you think you derive, then that cycle is going to be very different from the cycle for Christians who know the God who reveals himself in flesh and blood as the one who loves us and redeems us. All right. Even when he reveals himself to us, God remains a mystery beyond words. And here we quote one of my favorite saints and fathers of the church, in fact, one of the four great doctors of the church, St. Augustine. If you understood God, it would not be God. Now, this often gets turned around and we think, well, that means God is not rational, or, the truth is the opposite of God, or I believe because it's false. That's not at all what Augustine is saying, and that's not what the Catechism is saying. Rather, let's continue to follow our meditation. If the right response to God is love, if our God is the God who is love, then think about that. There's a sense in which you never fully understand love. And I don't just mean the simple, giddy love, the crush, the kind of I'm deeply attracted to someone and motivated. I mean what comes even after that and fulfills it, the full commitment, the desire for the good of another and to belong to another and have the other belong to you. All right, that's the kind of love that none of us actually fully understand, not because it's not rational, but because the point of reason is to allow us to love. If I think of my wife, or any spouse thinks of his or her spouse, you'll immediately see the truth of this. You want to know your beloved. You want to be known by your beloved. But the kind of knowledge you want is not simply knowledge about. It's not simply rational content. It's the kind of knowledge which leads to the full commitment of love. That's what Augustine is saying. If you're really in love with this God, who is the only God, the proper God, the God beyond all other gods, then you recognize that this God is far deeper, more profound, far marvelous than anything that your own reason can understand. That is, the God who reveals himself to Jews and to Christians exceeds human reason, is beyond the merely religious. and into the fully theological. And of course, the God of our faith has revealed himself as he who is, and has made himself known as abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. We'll need to think a lot more about the relationship between love and faith. But for now, suffice it to say that faith is a kind of knowledge, precisely the kind of knowledge which allows us to love. And what is it that we recognize when we actually love God? God is the God of truth and love. God, in fact, is beyond truth and love. Nothing we could imagine on our own would be adequate to God. And yet, God reveals himself in flesh and blood, and so we can know, we can have a relationship with the God who is truth and love. Faith is that connection. Faith is that knowledge of God, or knowing God in the way that God knows himself.